Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the US acknowledges the acute and unfair debt borne by Africa as dozens of heads of state from the continent attend day 2 of the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. Also, Eritrean troops are accused of war crimes and possible crimes against humanity in the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray. Many of the attacks reportedly happened after a November peace deal last year meant to draw a line under 2 years of brutal fighting. And African international art markets have gone from strength to strength, some of it down to a growing African middle class, some because of deepening international appreciation for the continent's cultural capital. I'll speak to Ghanaian-German artist Zohra Opoku about the rising support for creatives from the continent. But first, those who produce the garbage refuse to pay their bills, declared Kenya's president at day 2 of the continent's first Africa Climate Summit. William Ruto's called for a stronger and more united voice on environmental issues affecting 1.3 billion Africans. Climate change is holding back the continent's economic progress as it bears the brunt for emissions produced by wealthier countries. Olivia Bizu brings us more from Nairobi.
At this summit has been how to finance Africa's solutions to climate change. Now, most of the people I've spoken to have talked about carbon credit markets that have really taken centre stage. But they have also been hugely criticised, as many say they just enable wealthy countries to continue business as usual, to continue polluting while Africa has to pay the price. Many African leaders are pushing for other forms of financing, as Zimbabwe's Minister for Agriculture, Anxious Masuka, explains.
I think we look at multi-channel sources of financing. We're looking at our own resources. We're looking at carbon trading. But we're also looking to the developed nations to be able to live up to their obligations to pay the 100 billion annually in order to complement all these efforts. And we're also looking at the private players to come on board to be able to look at the ecological, sustainable and governance issues so that we all are in this to be able to complement each other. So multiple sources of financing are required to accelerate our transition.
The question of how to finance Africa's solutions is not the only challenge. Africa also needs to come together as a strong and united continent, a point that Comorian President Azali Assoumani really emphasised during his speech on Tuesday. African leaders are not only struggling to agree on how to finance their solutions, but also on what their priorities should be. One thing is certain, African leaders only have one more day to prove to the world that they can speak with one voice.
Now, Burkina Faso's army said that 53 members of the security forces have been killed in an attack by suspected jihadists in the north. A unit came under attack Monday in the town of Kumbri in Yetenga. The country saw 2 military coups last year, in part motivated by frustration over failures to curb a jihadist insurgency that's claimed thousands of lives. Rights group Amnesty International has accused Eritrean troops allied with the country's government of extensive war crimes months after a peace deal was signed to end a brutal civil war centred around the northern region of Tigray. The deal from last November between the government and Tigrayan rebels called for the withdrawal of foreign forces, but Eritrean troops still operate in Tigray as the country was not party to that agreement. Our Clotilde Hazard has more.
Today, investigators from NGO Amnesty International interviewed 49 Tigrayan survivors, witnesses and officials before concluding that possible war crimes and crimes against humanity had been committed against civilians in northern Ethiopian region since the signing of a peace deal at the end of last year. Many Tigrayans accused Eritrean soldiers of abuse. 11 women reported sexual slavery and gang rape inside a military camp, even 3 months after the peace agreement that was meant to end 2 years of civil war. Eritrean soldiers were also accused of the summary executions of at least 20 civilians men during house-to-house raids in early November. The forces still control territory near the border. Communities in part of the Irob district are despair for help from the federal government.
The life of people, Irob people now is very in danger. They don't have any access of food or civil aid. There is no free movement. There is no medication. There is no market access. The abduction. 35, 36 are abducted. 36 uses.
Many NGOs are calling for the renewal of the UN's International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. It's supposed to end this month. They are also urging the African Commission to restart a closed investigation into Tigray. Rights organizations are warning that there are desperate need for a more robust transitional justice policy for Ethiopia.
Clotilde Ezard there for us. Now, some people in Lagos got an easier start to the week. After years of delays, residents finally got to ride on the Nigerian megacity's new railway. What the local government hopes is a start to an ease into its infamous gridlock. Clarice Fortune has more.
Mind the closing doors. The first metro is ready to depart after more than a 4 decades delay. It now links the mainland part of the city with the more affluent Lagos Island. Among the first passengers, the Lagos state governor, who's playing station manager. And passengers seem to enjoy their new way of transport.
It's a very smooth experience. It was very short. It was very smooth as well. Everything was organized.
It's going to be a boost to the economy, and also it's going to improve the livelihood of people, because we spend a lot of time on traffic. And with this, in less than 10 minutes, we are here.
The Blue Line project, built by a Chinese construction company, is a relief for more than 20 million residents used to spend hours in traffic.
It will also reduce the environmental pollution because it's run by electricity. And of course, it will make transportation more seamless and more comfortable.
The second phase of the rail project is expected to begin later this year, allowing the metro to carry some 500,000 passengers daily.
Now, in the wake of the pandemic, the African art ecosystem has seen a huge economic transformation. There's been a surge in international exhibitions, fairs and sales as institutions, collectors and investors grow more appreciative of the cultural and monetary value of the creative output of the continent. In 2021 alone, there were estimates that worldwide sales of work by African makers had surged by over 44% in just 12 months. Now, one of those stoking some of the buzz around African artistic offerings is Ghanaian-German artist Zohra Opoku, whose work is currently being exhibited at London's Tate Modern as part of an exhibition celebrating African contemporary photography. Now, she joins me now. Zohra, thanks so much for making the time to speak to me. Again, congratulations for your exhibition at the Tate. Now, first of all, you're based in Ghana now. Have you noticed growing international interest in African art, and how does that compare to local demand for African art?
Thank you so much for talking to me tonight. So the interest in African art, I mean, from the local side, we have a collector base which is growing. It's petite, but it's something where we can be proud of, that we also have, Africans among us collecting us, and we have African American collectors as well who are very keen to collect art from Ghana. And on the other side, I have to say that I have engaged with collectors for a long time, and it's a conversation which is something we have to also let grow and bloom, and not just be the first of all and then nothing after that happens. It's really building a network and building trust in what we are doing.
Having moved to Africa, because you're currently based in Accra, having moved to Accra after you were born and you grew up in East Germany, has that moving to the continent affected your own sense of creative identity? I
believe if I wouldn't have moved, I would definitely not be here right now with you. I think the identity, it's my calling. I've grown up in a Caucasian society. Literally the only black person in my city. So coming to Africa, coming to Ghana, definitely pushed me into the direction I learn about myself. And I believe as identity plays a very big role in art, it has to, it helps to be authentic and has to be researching and going deep into who we are.
So earlier when we were speaking, you mentioned that you thought you saw some of the beginning of that growing international interest in African art in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd in the United States. Now, much of the engine for the Black Lives Matter movement was rooted in the States, or at least not in Africa itself. So do you see amongst those who appreciate African art some kind of conflation between Black art and African art? And for you, is there much of a difference?
Yeah, I think I really don't like to think into stereotypes or boxes. I believe that, the Black artists are also African artists. But of course, I mean, the background is different in the sense of growing up, being in the States. I don't really like to categorize that much, but I think the small differences are what are we reflecting. And while African contemporary artists are coming from a very traditional painting background, and just in the last decade, it became much more experimental, much more inventive in sense of exploring and identifying with what is happening on the continent, what is more identified is happening globally. And for African American artists, Black artists, I would say definitely we have the George Floyd movement, which has influenced their emotions strongly, expressing the frustration how Black people are stigmatized in America.
Thank you so much for giving us some of your insight, Zohra. Anyone lucky enough to be in London, try and catch her exhibition, will be running at the Tate Modern. Oh, she's one of a collective of artists in that look at contemporary African art at the Tate Modern, and that will be running until mid-January next year. Zohra, thank you very much for speaking to us. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for Eye on Africa. Join us again if you can. Till then, take care.
"35 years ago, anti-apartheid activist Dulcie September, the representative of Nelson Mandela's African National Congress in France, was murdered in central Paris.
C'était vraiment une personne complètement dévouée à la cause. Moi, je l'avais surnommée l'incorruptible.
Whose toes was she stepping on? Why was the investigation unsuccessful?
We do know from what we understand is that French officials were involved in cleaning up her papers subsequent to her murder.
Who killed the political activist? Was it a state-sponsored crime? A report by Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.